Today we're going to be talking about the quadratic formula with complex roots. Now, if you recall, we've already used this formula, so you guys should be pretty familiar with it. What we're going to do today is we're going to be given examples in which you're going to wind up with negatives underneath the radical, so you're going to wind up with complex roots. Okay, so let's take a look at number 1. Okay, so this equation is already set equal to 0, so we can just jump right in. I'm going to just write out, I'm going to label my A as 5, my B is -4, and my C is equal to 3. Okay, so if we plug this into the quadratic formula, we'll have x equals -4, so +4, plus and minus the square root of -4, remember to put that in parentheses, and then square it, minus 4 times 5 times 3, and that's going to be all over 2 times 5. Okay, so that leaves us with x equals 4 plus and minus, all right, the square root of, well, let's figure out what -4 squared minus 4 times 5 times 3 is. When you do that, you should wind up with -44 under the radical, and that's going to be over 10. Now, when we have a negative under the radical, we know that we're going to have an I in our answer, so we're going to have a complex solution. All right, so let's first break down radical -44. All right, so we have x equals 4 plus and minus. Well, 44 can be broken down into rad 4 and rad 11. And then because we have a negative, we want to put that -1 here. And since we know that the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of -1 is I, I guess you could just cross this off and make this a 2. Please put it above the radical, not underneath the radical. And we can cross this off and make it an I. So now when I kind of reorder this, instead of writing 2 radical 11I, we put the 2I in front of the radical 11. So that leaves us with x equals 4 plus and minus 2I radical 11 over 10. All right, so now if we look at our numbers outside the radical, right, we have a +4, a 2I really, and a 10. So if we say what's the biggest number that divides evenly into 4, 2, and 10, that would be 2. So I'm going to just divide everything by 2. So 4 divided by 2 would be 2. Bring down the plus and minus. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. So you could write 1I or just I, radical 11. And then 10 divided by 2 is 5, so that's going to be over 5. All right, so now they want us to take our answer and write it in what we call A plus BI form. So what that means is we want to have some number plus, or it could be minus, some other number times I. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to individually have to divide the terms in our numerator by this 5 in the denominator. Okay, so let's start here. If we take 2 and divide it by 5, we can just rewrite that as 2/5. So underneath here, I'm just going to write x equals 2/5. And then I know the formula just says plus, but we have a plus and a minus. So I'm going to bring down my plus and minus. Now, we want to have some number in front of our I. So see this I right here? I'm going to take that and bring it off to the side. And what that's going to do is leave us with a radical 11 over 5 in front of our I. So what we did was we took our answer and wrote it in A plus BI form. So our A would be 2/5, and then we have plus and minus. Our B would be radical 11/5, and we take this I and just bring it right to the outside. So this is A plus BI form. All right, so in number 2, we first have to set our equation equal to 0. So if you were to add 9 to both sides of the equation, you would be left with 2x squared plus 8x plus 9 equals 0. All right, so now we can label our A, our B, and our c. So that's going to be a 2, an 8, and a 9. All right, so then from here, let's just take it and plug it into the quadratic formula. So we have x equals -8 plus and minus the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times 2 times 9, and that whole thing is going to be over 2 times 2. Okay, so we have x equals -8 plus and minus radical. All right, well, if we want to figure out what 8 squared minus 4 times 2 times 9 is, that's going to give us a -8. So we have a -8 under the radical. And then 2 times 2 is 4. All right, so now let's break up that radical. So we have x equals -8 plus and minus. Well, radical 8 can be broken up into a radical 4 and a radical 2. And because we have this negative sign under here, we would also have to multiply that by radical -1. And let's put that whole thing over 4. All right, so since the square root of 4 is 2, let's cross that off and make it a 2. Since the square root of -1 is I, let's cross that off and make it an I. So at this point, we have -8 plus and minus. Now we're going to, again, group the 2 and the I together and put that before a radical. So we have 2I radical 2 over 4. All right, so now if we look at all of our numbers on the outside of the radical, we have an 8, really a -8, but let's just look at it as an 8, a 2, and a 4. The biggest number that divides evenly into all three of these is 2. So let's just take them all and divide it by 2. So -8 divided by 2 would be -4. I'm going to bring down my plus and minus. Positive 2 divided by 2 is 1, so 1I, which I'm just going to write as I. And bring down the radical 2. And then 4 divided by 2 is just 2. All right, so again, let's take this and let's write it in A plus BI form. All right, so my A is going to be -4 over 2. So we can write x equals -4 over 2. And then we have our plus and minus. So let's write plus and minus. Our B is going to be this radical 2 over 2. And then we can just take this I that we have here and just bring it out to the outside. Now, if you look at this answer, there's something we can actually simplify. So let's go through and do that. If you take -4 and divide it by 2, -4 divided by 2 is -2. So let's rewrite this in simplest form. This is really going to be -2 plus and minus. And then nothing here simplifies because this 2 is under a radical. So I'm just going to bring down the radical 2 over 2I. So this is an A plus BI form. Okay, so number 3 I'm going to start off with you guys, but then I want you to actually stop the video and try to finish it on your own. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to get this equation, well, we want to distribute the 2x squared into the parentheses. So let me just bring down the left-hand side of the equation. And when we distribute the 2x squared, well, 2x squared times 3x squared is 6x to the 4th. And 2x squared times -1 is -2x squared. Okay, so in order to get this equation set equal to 0, you could show these steps. We could subtract 6x to the 4th from both sides. And in that same step, we could also add the 2x squared to both sides. So what's going to happen is on the right-hand side of the equation, everything's going to cancel, and we're going to be left with 0. Now on the left-hand side of the equation, the x to the 4th terms cancel, and if we add here, 4x squared plus 2x squared is, I'm just going to move it over a little, 6x squared, and I'm going to bring down my -3x, and I'm going to bring down my +2. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to ask you to stop the video and try to solve for the roots and write your answer in simplest A plus BI form. Then when you're done, you can hit play and see how you did. All right, so here's all the workout for you. Basically you're just taking these values, plugging in the quadratic formula. You should wind up with a -39 under the radical. Now, 39 actually doesn't break up, so I'm just going to break that up into radical 39, radical negative 1. So that becomes I radical 39. And then here, when you write it in a plus bi form, 3/12 simplifies to 1/4. And then we have our plus and minus radical 39/12 I. All right, hope everyone got that right. Okay, now with number 4, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to basically, find a common denominator and get this into a quadratic equation in standard form that's set equal to 0. Okay, so stop the video at this point and do that, and then you can hit play and see how you did. Okay, so that leaves us with x squared plus 9 equals 0. Now, from this point, we can label our a, our b, and our c. So what you'll notice is we have our b missing, okay? If you wanted to write this as x squared plus 0x plus 9, you could, because technically didn't these cancel to give us 0x? So our b is actually equal to 0. That's what we're missing. Our a is the number in front of the x squared, which is 1, and our c is that 9. All right, so now I'd like you again to hit stop, plug it into the quadratic formula, simplify, and once you're done, hit play and see how you did. All right, so this time we wound up with negative 36 under the radical. So when you break that down into radical 36 and radical 1, we actually get rid of the radical. It becomes 6 and then I. Now, if you have 0 plus 6i, that's just positive 6i, and 0 minus 6i, that's just negative 6i. So you could basically just ditch this 0. But then 6i divided by 2 simplifies to 3i, so you wind up with positive and negative 3i. All right, again with number 5, I'd like you to start this and get it into a quadratic equation set equal to 0 in standard form, and then you can hit play and see how you did. All right, so I first distributed the 2, and then what I did was I took my 2x minus 6 and put it over 1. Now you could have found a common denominator. I just decided when you have a fraction equal to another fraction to cross multiply. And this negative symbol here, keep in mind you could either put it up here with the 5 or you could put it down here with the x, not both. So I just chose to put it with the 5 up here. So it left me with 2x squared minus 6x when I cross multiplied here equals negative 5. And then to set it equal to 0, I just moved the negative 5 over and it became a positive 5. Okay, so at this point, stop the video again and try out the quadratic formula on your own. All right, so I plugged everything in. We wound up with negative 4 into the radical, and I broke that down into radical 4, radical negative 1, which becomes 2i. Now to go from this step down to this step, I just divided all of my numbers by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, 2 divided by 2 is 1, there's really a 1 in there, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now because we want it in a plus bi form, what we have to do is we have to just kind of, individually look at these. My a would be 3 over 2, which I wrote here. And my b would be, really, there's a 1 in front of this I, so it would be 1 over 2 I.